Coming to you from the Toby Family Auditorium at the Commonwealth Club. It's Week to Week, the political roundtable for Wednesday, April 10th, 2019. And if my math is correct, this is the 125th Week to Week program we've done, so thank you for joining us tonight and not getting sick of us yet. So this week, comedian Chelsea Handler bade a fond farewell to the departing Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen. Handler tweeted, quote, "Best of luck to Kirstjen Nielsen. I'm not sure where you'll get hired with a resume that includes locking kids in cages. Just kidding, good luck at Fox News." I'm John Zipper, your host for Week to Week, and on tonight's program, we are going to discuss the administration's dramatic immigration moves this week, the struggle over the Mueller report, local Congressman Eric Swalwell entering the 2020 race, the housing battle heats up locally, and more. And of course, we'll send you off with our live news quiz and chocolate giveaway. Everyone's welcome at the Commonwealth Club, so any opinions that are expressed up here are those solely of the speakers and not of the Commonwealth Club. Now let's meet our panelists for today. Actually, you know them all. I'll start at the far end of the stage with Bob Butler, a reporter for KCBS Radio. You can follow him on Twitter at BobButler7. Next to him is Marisa Lagos, a reporter of the California Politics and Government Desk at KQED News. She's on Twitter at MLagos. And next to me is C.W. Nevius, a.k.a. Chuck Nevius, a columnist for the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat, of course, a longtime former San Francisco Chronicle columnist, and on Twitter at C.W. Nevius. So welcome back. You all know how we do this. There are question cards spread throughout the room. Write down some questions, challenge us, and someone will collect the questions, bring them up to me, and I will read them. So let's start off with immigration. It's been almost an hourly matter this past few days of big things happening, people leaving. A lot has happened. A court struck down a Trump administration plan to force asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while their cases were awaiting a hearing. The Secretary of Homeland Security was forced out, or in Washington speak, resigned. The Secret Service Chief, Randolph Els, I'm not sure, Els, I think. Els, he resigned. The president dropped the nomination, or pre-resigned, his candidate to head ICE. That's the current, well, had been the acting executive of ICE, but now he's resigned. And reportedly, the head of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service and the General Counsel for the Homeland Security Department are also both being forced out. So,
who says Trump doesn't create jobs?
Right.
It's workforce mobility.
But he only hires the best people.
He does. But Marisa, let's start with you. I mean, what do you make of kind of a whirlwind of change? And do you think we're going to see different policy coming out of this, or what?
I mean, the problem for Trump, right, is that he has proposed a series of, I mean, like, let's say Kirstjen Nielsen, or Kirstjen Nielsen. I'm still a little unclear on how to say her name. Former Secretary Nielsen. So, you know, I think people in San Francisco think of her as the woman that locked up kids in cages and defended that policy. But apparently behind the scenes, she was the one saying, this is a terrible idea. We will never win in court. So I think, one, that tells you the direction they're going in. Like, if she's not tough enough, then who is? And I think the thing is that the president wants to institute an immigration policy, much like we saw with his sort of bucking of Congress over
the wall.
The wall. I was like, what was the other thing? The wall. That, like, it flies in the face of the sort of both political and legal reality in this country. If you want to rewrite immigration laws, you got to go to Congress. They have not had any, success there, even when they had both houses. And so I think that this is like the Stephen Miller takeover of DHS. But I think, again, which could be really bad for a lot of people seeking asylum in the short term. I think long term, they will continue to run into the same problems. But it's not good when, like, the people that, like, the guy from ICE who, like, this is not, this is not Nancy Pelosi being asked to run ICE, right? Like, these are pretty hardcore immigration hawks, and they're not strong enough for Trump. So good luck, I guess, would be my 2 cents there, and maybe just make Stephen Miller the emperor of that and see how that goes. I don't know.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, Chuck, Stephen Miller has been the through line, the connection between a lot of these things, and there's been a lot of reporting about how his influence is now the major influence on Donald Trump, or maybe turn it another way, President Trump is taking his advice over even Jared Kushner, who apparently is kind of on the outs, at least as far as immigration and border issues are concerned. Good thing, bad thing?
Well,
I'm just struck by what an odd group of people Donald Trump surrounds himself with. And Stephen Miller is almost cartoonish in his anti-immigrant. He's screaming and yelling and carrying on about these things. This Roger Stone, I mean, he does look like a cartoon. And these are some of his closest advisors. You know, Colbert said that Kirsten Nielsen was going to resign to devote more time to splitting up her own family. So,
apparently her allies are like, did you see that story, working on like rehabbing her
Trying to
image so
rehab
she
her-
can get a job after this?
Yes.
Because, you know, to your point.
Yes.
immigration-wise, the one thing I think is that Trump can't continue to claim that the immigrants are causing crime, because we've seen the statistics, and they commit crime at lower levels than people who are here. And white supremacists commit more murders. So that's not on the books. It is also the case that we had millions of immigrants in this country working, and many of those industries were delighted to have them and want them back, and are now suffering because they're not there. So the country isn't full, and they're not causing crime, and that leaves just one thing. Trump doesn't like people of color. And that's what we're running on, and that is an ugly thought for this country, I think. It's just...
Bob?
It's an ugly thought, but it's the reality. I'm in the midst of judging a bunch of awards. I think it's the New American Media Awards, an awards contest, and there's 36 entries, and I think probably 30 of them are on immigration. And I watched the piece today, which was so powerful. They followed an immigrant family that comes into the United States. Living in the United States. The kids are citizens, but the whole family works in the fields. And it was so powerful, and right now it's my favorite. Mm-hmm. But the problem that you have with this is that, and one of the stories I read said something that I've always felt this way. The same people whose ancestors were ridiculed, vilified, attacked, are now attacking Latinos and Muslims. And I think that tells me they don't know what this country is about. And if they don't know what this country is about, if Stephen Miller does not acknowledge I think it was his grandmother who couldn't speak English, who came to the United States, then we have a problem, and we have a problem. And I'm not sure what's going to solve it, but this is an election issue for the president. He wants to be hard line on immigration, and I think when you look at what is his platform going to be in 2020, it's going to be immigration.
Right.
And he's going to say, we're keeping these bad people out of the country. And I hate to say it, his base is too damn stupid to understand they're lying to him. He's lying to them.
Although in 2016 it did not work. And
2018.
2018.
Yeah, 2018.
It
Pardon me.
did
It
work.
did-
But his base still stuck with him.
Well,
it's
right.
just that everybody else.
But as Mitch McConnell and other people are saying, this is not a winner for us.
No.
You can
But he's
make
not
this,
going
Maybe to not,
you can make
but-
this go if you want, but it's not.
It's
it
not
hasn't
a
proved
winner
to be
for congressional Republicans, but it continues to be a winner for Trump. And I think that is why Stephen Miller retains the influence he does. Trump knows he is speaking to the base, the 30 to 40% that will
30.
not abandon him.
30%.
30%.
Yeah.
We'll go with 30.
All right.
Yeah. But the reason why it didn't work for them in 2018 is because the 70% that is opposed to came out and voted. And that's the only thing that's going to save this country if you think it needs to be saved in 2020.
Well, and did that 70% come out over the immigration issue? No.
No, it
They
was
came
over
out
healthcare.
for healthcare, right.
But they
exactly.
also did not like the immigration policies either.
Well, and I've said this before, Rick Wilson is a very anti-Trump Republican strategist. And when he was here at the club, he was kind of cautioning Democrats that immigration is not your key to getting the Hispanic vote, for example,
Right.
which had been bandied about. He was saying when you do the polling with Hispanic voters, I think he said like the top two issues were like healthcare and jobs or education,
Right.
something like that. And yeah, immigration's in there, but it's not one of the top things. And there are other voices, if I could. Andrew Sullivan, another anti-Trump conservative, is saying actually Democrats shouldn't totally downplay the idea that there's not a crisis at
should
the
say
border.
that. That's
There
right.
is, what is it, 100,000 migrants who were turned away in March alone.
Right.
I mean, there's a huge issue there. They could have a big debate over how best to deal with this.
Right.
But I'm not sure, or at least these critics of the Democrats are saying, you're not, by saying there's not a crisis there's not an emergency at all, that's the kind of thing that some voters are going to be saying, look, I can see with my own eyes.
Well, the Democrats are saying there's an emergency, but it was caused by the administration. But you have to ask yourself, why are so many people coming to this country to seek asylum? What is so bad where they live? And I don't think that's the issue we're not dealing with. So the president's solution to that problem is cutting off aid to these countries, which that's not going to work. And you know, let me just say, and this is a personal, I don't have any evidence of this, but then we don't need evidence anymore to say things. Who creates these caravans? I would not be at all surprised if you find somebody that voted for Trump that's putting the money up for these caravans, because it gives them a great issue to talk about. All right, I put it out there. So.
Okay.
Caravan.
Like I said, I got no
conspiracy.
evidence.
Okay.
Bob Butler
Okay.
making
But,
news
you know,
tonight.
I'm just wondering.
That's where we say the opinions expressed by the panelists. Okay, let's move on. Well, actually, a couple questions from the
But
audience.
this is so uplifting and fun. I mean, why can't we keep talking about this?
Well, here, this will allow you to pontificate. What is an appropriate immigration policy? I mean, right now, even I said, oh, they could have a debate on that. I mean, they're not going to have a debate.
This is the problem, though. Like, I think in the past we couldn't get to anything because there were some differences. There was a lack of political will. I mean, let's put it out there. Like, Obama punted on this issue, right? This was not something that we've seen either Democrats or Republicans really take up. I mean, Bush tried to some extent. But if you see what Trump has done to the Republican Party, I'm not sure there is a compromise to be had now, because one side is saying immigration is not a bad thing inherently. You know, we need to figure out a legal system for people to come here. We need to respect international laws around asylum. And the other side is saying immigrants are bad, and we don't. And the problem is there are too many people coming into this country. And so when you have that binary situation, like, I feel like in some ways we've moved even further than the last 25 years of a lack of, you know. And I don't think that all Republicans feel like that, but that is who is sort of running the party right now. And so I really don't see a world in which any movement will happen unless one party takes control of both houses and the presidency.
You mentioned George Bush, and he recently gave a speech, or I think it was at a naturalization ceremony for immigrants, and very specifically pointed out, you know, the strength that immigrants give to the country.
Yeah, I mean, and he made efforts. Probably not the favorite person of a lot of people here, but, you know, hindsight.
He's looking better and better. Let me just say.
Yeah, he sure is. But you know, there's a reason why this issue has languished for so many years. Think about who owns agriculture. For the most part, it's Republicans. You know, the big money, the big farms and everything, and they can't find Americans to pick the food. Americans aren't going to do that kind of work, so they have to depend on something. I think the problem is that when you have people who are in this country doing this kind of work for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and they have no path to citizenship, that's just stupid. Some of these people are really upstanding members of the country. Some of them own businesses, but they aren't allowed to become citizens. And now you have people that own a business, they have American kids, they got an American wife, but when they were 16, they got caught smoking a joint. See you later. That's just insane.
I'm going to have a Bob Butler moment where you say
I
something.
thought you were going to be the Bob Butler of tonight. But
Is
Bob
that,
Butler-
no, I'm going to have a Bob Butler moment. I'm not sure that this wasn't working pretty well before all along. We have been enormous number of people coming to the country. Again, they're getting employment. They're helping industries, and it's not just farm workers.
Right.
It's construction is huge. They're making 3 to 4 restaurants is another big one. They're making 3 to 4 times what they could in other countries where conditions are terrible. But we're all of us screaming bloody murder that they were taking our jobs, because I don't think they are. And were they committing crimes? Because it didn't seem like that's the case. And we ginned this up about all these murderers and rapists coming into the country.
Well, we didn't gin this up.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is, I'm not sure it isn't a created problem. We certainly need to work on a path to citizenship. We certainly need to work for the dreamers. We've got all this, I think the American people would say that's not a bad idea, but we've become so emotionally entangled in this thing, and I'm not sure it was that big a problem to start with. We weren't doing a pretty good job. Maybe not a great job, maybe we can improve it, but a pretty good job of handling immigrants.
Well, and it goes in waves. I mean, remember the crisis over unaccompanied minors during the Obama administration. I mean, this, and to Bob's earlier point, it's largely because of what's happening in other countries. You know, our governor went down to El Salvador to see what was really happening down there.
Someone asked about that, yeah. Bring it up.
And, you know, which, whatever.
No, do tell us.
I mean, there is use in these fact-finding missions. I think there's a lot of critics of Newsom who say there's a lot of problems back home. PG&E, which we will talk about later.
So wait, are you saying some people are saying photos of him listening at someone's kitchen table to their stories in El Salvador?
Political?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Photo op?
heard
No.
that.
We're not just picking on Donald Trump here.
Well, he did say that it's over for business, that you can build hotels along the coast and stuff now. What's that sound like?
You know what? Marisa said we needed something more uplifting. So let's go to a topic that has there's less consternation about it, less anger. It's the Mueller report. So this is actually our first time on Week to Week that we've had an opportunity to talk about it, because Robert Mueller very inconsiderately dropped it like right after our previous program. Thanks, Bob. And luckily, not much has happened, because we don't know anything more about it now than we did then.
I know, I went to Mexico for a week, came back, nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing happened.
Well, now, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, says he'll release the redacted report within a week. Democrats, such as Nancy Pelosi, are saying they don't trust him and that he should show them the full report. So do you see any way that there will be general trust in that we're actually learning the general contents of this report?
From Barr?
Yeah.
No. And I think because of the circumstances, how he got the job, we're told, because of the long letter he wrote, basically saying the president can't be charged with obstruction, the things that he has done to get the job, and then not, even during his confirmation, not saying, yes, I will make sure that you get the report, I will give you as much as I can. Well, that's a dodge, because he decides what you're going to see. And for Mueller to spend 2 years, and his team spending 2 years collecting information, and the collusion was always going to be a problematic thing to prove, because I just think the administration was too stupid to know how to collude with the Russians. But the obstruction was out in plain sight. And for him to say that there was no obstruction, from Barr to say that, you know, I just don't see that that's possible. So he says he will release a redacted report. The redactions are going to be the problem. It'll end up in court.
But it is, if you listen, I mean, he's been testifying on Capitol Hill the last 2 days, and I didn't tune in for every second, but the way he's framing some of this is sort of changing, and it's interesting, and I think it'll be fascinating to see. I mean, Democrats have subpoena power in the House, right? I think he'll put out the redacted report. I think they'll still pursue the full report, which, you know, regardless of party, I think they absolutely should. I think Republicans would do no less, literally. And I think it'll be an ongoing fight. I actually think that some of the stuff he said today about Trump having
Spying?
the spying about the campaign, like, to me, that's even more troubling in some ways, because it's sort of like, I think the problem Democrats have with the way this is rolled out is that when you put out the 4-page memo and not the actual report, you sort of cement in public opinion what that report says. Certainly the president is claiming victory. It sounds like the report's a lot more complicated than that. And
Like
so
400 pages more?
yeah, 10 times more, 100 times more, whatever. And so I think that that's really what they're up against. I mean, personally, I think that from a political standpoint, you know, back to the immigration versus healthcare debate, I think there's probably more to find in his taxes than there might be in that report, because he's done so much of this in plain sight, and we sort of know, and I think people are pretty entrenched on how they feel about that. I think that the conflicts of interest are sort of more fruitful path for Democrats to go down, and one that's going to be eminently fascinating to watch, since Treasury just today, I think, said they are not going to give those tax returns over to Dems without a fight.
By the deadline.
By the deadline.
Yeah,
They're-
which
they're
was,
still-
But without a fight,
They're still
basically.
thinking it over. That's
Right.
it.
And they have consulted with the White House. So yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably get most of the report at some point,
I
or
think
at least
so.
Democrats
I
will
think
in
so.
Congress.
I think
But
it'll come out.
what does that mean for public opinion? Like, it's fully baked at this point.
Well, I thought Mayor Pete from South Bend,
Buttigieg.
Buttigieg.
I practiced that a lot before.
I did
interviewed him.
too. Me too. I've been saying it aloud in my bathroom mirror. He said the other day, we keep looking for this thing. It's going to show up in the Mueller report, someplace else. It's going to be so horrible. People are going to be like, oh my God. And he said, we've seen a lot of horrible things already. And a lot of those people that support him are not moved. And the chances that something's going to come out of the Mueller report and they're all going to go, oh, far better to concentrate on policies that can, like Medicare, like health care, that can move the Democratic Party forward. And I really think that if you have someone that you think is incompetent, and I think the president is incompetent, rather than try to trip him up, I think you're better to step aside and let him demonstrate how incompetent he is. And I think he's doing it.
mm-hmm.
So and I've heard several people say, and I agree, you can impeach, you can go ahead and go with impeachment if you want, but even if it's successful, 42% of people are going to say that was a political stunt. It's far better to beat him in 2020 at the ballot box.
Yeah, that's what Comey said.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to see impeachment. The best thing to do is to vote him out. But personally, I'd love to see him get his wall in Texas and see him do eminent domain on people along the border and
On
see
the
how
border,
that
yeah.
goes over.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right. I mean, I think that should be Democrats' argument for closing the border. You know when you should do that? October 15th, 2020. Close the border. Like, I mean, it is. But I think it's funny. I heard that, I can't remember who said this from the New York Times, but that's basically Maggie Haberman's strategy for interviewing him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't fight back. Just hand the rope. I think that's something we all know from interviewing politicians.
Yeah.
Not just Trump. sometimes,
but that's-
sometimes you just let them go.
But that's the one thing that does bother me about the White House press corps. And I was in Vegas yesterday, and there was a forum beyond the briefing room, and it had Yamiche Alcindor, Stephen Portnoy, Hallie Jackson, and Cecilia Vega from ABC. And they were talking about what happens covering the White House and how insane it is. And, Alcindor said, I used to cover hurricanes and things, and I thought when I got this job, it would be like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Well, not hardly. But the one thing that Jackson said is that, the president has gone from saying fake news is the enemy of the people, and reporters, fake news, enemy of the people, to now all news is the enemy of the people. And that's what his base believes, that any kind of news, if I don't hear it from the president, it's not true. He's been very effective in doing that. And, I cringe to think of 5 more years of that.
Okay.
So we did not succeed on
Lifting
the
the moon.
uplifting part.
Okay.
We got some laughs.
The next topic, though.
They're sort of
the
like-
next topic is local boy makes good. Eric Swalwell, an East Bay congressman, is entering the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. That's either good news or bad news, depending on how you feel.
Who's not
about
who's not
Eric
entering?
Swalwell. Sorry.
Yeah.
Who's not entering the race?
You guys heard it here first. I'm running for
There you
president.
go. Get it right.
My husband's like,
I don't think you can say that on public
Presumably-
radio.
sorry.
I think that's one of the
From
people.
the radio reporter. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
yeah, the radio reporter when he said this.
I think that's one of those
Considering
PBS
6-second delay.
banned words.
Well, let's talk a bit about Eric Swalwell. I mean, he's 38 years. Well, actually, yes. The New York Times headline was Eric Swalwell is running for president. Who is he?
Yeah.
That was their headline. Bob, let's start with you. I mean, what does he bring to the race? What do you know? What
Josh Richmond.
Josh Richmond.
Josh
That's
Richmond,
right.
His flack, former.
Yeah.
Former week-to-week
Former
panelist.
colleague,
Yes,
former colleague of
former
mine on the Chauncey Bailey Project, Josh Richmond. What he brings to the table is what everybody else brings to the table. He doesn't like Trump. I think that's the main thing. I mean, I was looking at one of I think it was the Times talking about him, said his claim to fame is he spent a lot of time on cable news, which he has, on CNN, on MSNBC. I'm not sure he's been on Fox. He has? Okay, good. But Swalwell, a former prosecutor in Alameda County, so he's a lawyer, he's a prosecutor, which means he knows how to ask good questions, and you would think that he's logical. So I think that's one thing. But then you have other people Kamala Harris is also a former prosecutor. So I don't know how he's going to stand out from the crowd. And when you have this many people, maybe as many as 20 people running for president on the Democratic ticket.
Those debates are going to be...
It's going to be insane. It will be as bad as... I was over in Rwanda back in 2015 talking about the Republican primary and the fact there were 17 candidates and how insane it was. This is going to be even more insane.
Yeah.
Then you got the Bernie supporters who are still rabid. So I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Speaking of insane.
Huh? Yeah, I covered him when he was here a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, the Bernie supporters look at him the way the Trump supporters look at Trump. Like with stars in their eyes. This is our guy, and you better not cheat him this time because it'll be really. It's like it's scary.
Chuck, Swalwell is 38, which would make him young, but he's already lost the youngster vote to Pete Buttigieg.
Buttigieg.
Who is just 37. Is Swalwell just kind of one of the ones at the kids' table? And Pete Buttigieg is getting huge. Fantastic. He's probably getting the best press.
He is
right
definitely
now, right?
he's having a moment. There isn't any question about it. And that.
Thank you.
And that's why the Swalwells of the world get into the race. Is who knows? Maybe I'll catch fire. Maybe I'll get lightning in a bottle and get this thing going.
Why did he wait so long?
Well, exactly. And I think
he's been gearing up for this for a year.
A case can be made. He's already too late.
Yeah.
We've already got Kamala Harris in California. Right. We've already got front runners in people like Biden who hasn't declared yet, and Bernie Sanders and so forth. Why wait for that? Two things. First of all, God bless him for running. It's not easy. You're putting yourself out there. He may be a little ahead of his time. I have to say I was not set on fire by his speeches, but maybe he'll... And he has an issue, and his issue is gun control. And I think he feels like that he can ride that hard. And again, God bless him for that. We'd like to see more gun control. So if nothing else, hopefully, he can push the issue. Maybe he builds his brand a little bit, and it goes from there. But I find it to be a quixotic idea.
Yeah, I think he's super smart and very impressive. To be fair, I think his real claim to fame is unseating Pete Stark, who was a congressman before he was even born in that seat, and who really was not doing his district a lot of good at the end. And I think that, Swalwell took him on, and it was an uphill battle, and he won. But yeah, I interviewed him, last July or August, and we knew that this was potentially happening, and I am sort of shocked that he waited until after the first quarter of fundraising. Maybe that's a strategy. I don't know. But I think it's going to be...
if you're going to do it, get in and do it. Yeah.
Right. And so, and I think, what is interesting to me is... Like a couple of weeks after Buttigieg announced, we interviewed him on Political Breakdown, and you were like, and he's impressive. There's a reason this guy is raising the money he is and getting the endorsements and polling as well. But again, he's the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Like, there's more people in like the 10 blocks around here than in that city, and so it's been impressive to me to watch him, but you also still think that for him it's an uphill climb. And so even like to the nth degree for someone like Swalwell, given, like if Kamala wasn't running, I think it would actually be a very different calculation, because maybe you could capture both the donors and the excitement in California. There are two things to point out here for any Californian, anybody who wants to run. One is that we moved up our primary, and we will be relevant. Our ballots will be going out like basically during Iowa caucuses. So anybody who wants to play in California cannot ignore this state the way that they have in years past and just come and get donations. And, you know, I think the second thing is that we are not a winner-take-all state in the Democratic primary. So you can not win California, but still collect a fair amount of delegates the way Bernie did.
That's a good point.
And, you know, that is a calculation to be made. Again, if you look at the polls, just like everywhere else, Biden and Bernie are way ahead of the pack. Kamala is coming in third, but she's not even winning her home state at this point. So,
And it makes you wonder how the polls would go if and when Biden does jump in.
right.
I think the polls will change all of a sudden because people are, look, he's leading the polls. He's not even in the race yet. So what happens when he finally
But do you
gets
think
in?
that'll go up or down? Because I think it can go both ways. You know what I mean? Like, I think some people, like, it's a lot easier to like the idea of somebody than when they're actually a candidate.
That's what I was going to say. I think you like the concept of Biden, but once you get him on the campaign trail and listen to him a little bit, you'll say, haven't we heard this all before?
Well, let's talk about Biden. And I'm reminded of, you remember the scene of George W. Bush giving Angela Merkel an unwanted shoulder rub?
Again, it seems so like kind and gentle in hindsight. After
Kind,
the last
gentle,
2 years,
And inappropriate.
Well, yes.
totally inappropriate,
yes.
but like compared to the last 2 years of news.
Well, what did you think about the whole, there were a number of women who came out and said, you know, yeah, that made me feel
You want me to answer that probably?
anyone. I'm not putting you on the
I would
spot
love
as a
to
woman,
answer
but please do if you want.
As a woman. And then you can be like, as somebody with daughters.
I have a wife.
Perfect. So here's my problem. I mean, A, it's creepy. Totally creepy. B, his initial reaction to it and then his after reactions to it have been terrible. And let's be clear. There is a continuum. Like, on one side are people who are like sexually assaulting people and doing really bad things. On the other hand, on the other side are people who are making women and, quite frankly, anybody feel uncomfortable. And like, it's not okay. None of it's okay. Of course, one side's worse. But like, to me, I felt like his initial reaction and then that video were just sort of out of touch, and then the joking about it. And you know, I've had this debate with men in my life who are like, it's not a big deal. And I'm like, okay, but as a man, how would you feel if somebody like walked up behind you and started like massaging your shoulders and sniffing your hair? Like, it's not a good feeling.
And it should be pointed out, there are photos and probably video as well
Of him doing it to
this to
men.
men as well.
Totally.
He's
Yeah.
Mr. Touchy-feely.
So to me, it's like, whatever. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up. It's not the crime, it's the like reaction to it, right? It's like, just own it and you can move on. But I don't think he's owned it in a sufficient way, in my personal opinion.
Well, I have a daughter. You know, the complaint with Biden was that he was a clueless older guy stuck in a past generation. And then this comes out and he makes that joke the next day and reinforces the fact that he's a clueless old white guy stuck in the wrong generation. You don't say that. You don't say, Nancy Pelosi had it perfect. It's not what you do, it's how it was received. And if it was received poorly, you're doing it wrong. And everybody's got the crazy. There's a couple that we see sometimes socially, and this guy is very...
Name names, Chuck.
It's David, her husband. No, it's not. But he's very handsy, and my wife has asked me to stick around, stay close. And this is a guy from another generation, and you kind of roll your eyes, but it's also creepy, unpleasant, and inappropriate. And Joe, it's creepy, unpleasant, and inappropriate. Don't make a joke of it. It's not a joke. And that's why I think the more you see of Joe Biden, I think he's a wonderful guy. He's had terrible tragedy in his life. I think he undercuts himself over and over with poor judgment in what he says. And I think that's going to be his problem.
I can't disagree with that because you look at people who grew up in a different generation. I mean, looking around the room, looking at myself, I'm not a spring chicken, and I grew up in an age where, women were not listened to, and they were subjected to this kind of treatment, and women were just quiet about it. And it wasn't until the professor from Stanford, the doctor from Stanford, I forget her name, who came forward, that this all of a sudden become a big issue. And I bet you, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I know there are women in this room that can say, yeah, that happened to me, and it was my boss, or it was this, you just had to deal with it. Well, you don't have to deal with it anymore. And I said Biden when he gets in, I think people are going to like him, but yes, this is the issue that could knock him out.
I also want to say, I actually think in a lot of ways, Joe Biden's bigger problems will be his extremely long record. The world has changed dramatically in the past 30 years, not just around the way you treat women. And, you know,
Anita Hill.
Anita Hill.
Right,
Anita
even
Hill.
before this came up, the
Anita Hill,
cooking.
you know, a lot of votes he took in Congress, Glass-Steagall. I mean, there are a lot of things that the Democratic Party was 20 or 30 years ago that it no longer is. And I think in the age of Bernie and Warren and Harris and Medicare for All is a rallying cry, even if he embraces a lot of those progressive policies, the questions about his record to me are the more substantive sort of concerns about whether he's the best person in this race. And I think that for Democrats, you know, there's this sort of, and I wouldn't argue it's totally binary, but this debate happening about, you know, do we try to get white working class voters back, or do we try to, you know, get voter turnout in among millennials and people of color? I think they should probably try to do both by being good candidates. But I think that, like, if you look at, you know, even the people that lost but made huge inroads, like Beto and Stacey Abrams, Andrew Gillum, that was by actually getting new voters out. And that, to me, seems like a better path than sort of the well-trodden one.
Yeah, and I think the number of times that I've been here, you'll be my test control group. For the most part, none of us are especially millennial age. But often we will say in this, wouldn't you like to see a fresh face in the Democrat? And overwhelmingly, we get nods. People say, yes, let's see someone new. Let's see someone new. And I think Biden's going to run up against that, plus his record, plus his tendency to put his foot in his mouth.
Well, and it appears with Kamala Harris that the opposition to her is pushing issues regarding her prosecutorial past, you know, cases she did or did not pursue and such.
Isaiah Espinosa.
Yeah,
Well, I just wonder how effective that's going to be. She's an impressive speaker. She's a forceful person. I think people like to see that. And she made decisions. She didn't go for the death penalty in the case here in San Francisco. Now Gavin Newsom has said we're going to enforce the death penalty. I don't think that's something that's going to knock her out. But it does reflect the fact that someone is worried about her and is trying to undercut her as best they can.
Yeah, I've heard that the Attorney General's office has like 200 pending public records requests, not just from journalists, from Oppo researchers, like everything. You know, they're trying to dig up everything. I mean, the thing about Kamala, as someone who's covered her basically since the beginning of her career, is I don't know that they're going to find a lot, because I think her biggest liability is her lack of like sticking her neck out, right? She has been so cautious her whole career. And I think we've seen a new Kamala in Congress. And as someone who's known her for this long, my question is, well, which one is it? Is it going to be the AG who lets the feds prosecute PG&E? Or is it going to be the person that we see, you know, at the Kavanaugh hearings?
Making Jeff Sessions nervous.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, you know, that may not, none of that may matter for people in North Carolina, South Carolina, you know, the places that she's really banking on. We may be too close to it. Because every story that comes out about her, I'm like, oh, that's a story? Like, we all knew that.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's not a lot of controversy. I mean, even the Isaac Espinosa prosecution, where she said she would not go for the death penalty, some people said she was being cowardly, but I think she was being pragmatic. Can you imagine a San Francisco jury giving someone the death penalty?
No, and she had run saying she wouldn't pursue it.
Right, but even saying that, you know, a San Francisco jury giving someone the death penalty, I just don't see it. So I think in that respect, I think she was pragmatic. But the way that the name she's made for herself on Capitol Hill during these hearings, I mean, making Jeff Sessions say that he was nervous by her questions. And he's a former prosecutor. Why are you nervous? I mean, she's very effective when it comes to questioning people.
Yeah.
Well, he also looks like a Keebler elf, so I think he had every reason to be nervous, actually.
Yeah. On that note, Marisa brought up
that should be off the record, I think.
Marisa brought up PG&E.
This is no holds barred tonight. We've already
Marisa
gone
brought up PG&E several times, I think.
Yes. So let's go to PG&E, Marisa.
Oh, fun.
I mean,
that's all I talk about normally.
Well, PG&E and the wildfires, they've got a new head coming in from the Tennessee Valley Authority, which I understand he's quite controversial.
No baggage there.
Of course, the bankruptcy, spurring local efforts such as here in San Francisco, for the city itself to control its own energy, own it and control its own energy system. So, Marisa, tell us what you've been diving into at work.
Yeah, so the new CEO, I think, was a really interesting pick. Interesting in the sense that they didn't really seem to listen to the governor or anybody else in California, and with the new board picks. This is a guy who ran the Tennessee Valley Authority, has overseen a cleanup where one of their contractors was recently found by a jury to have botched a cleanup on coal ash. Dozens of workers were killed, actually died after this cleanup. Hundreds were sickened. The next phase of the trial hasn't happened, so it's not clear how much the authority itself will be held liable. But this guy, I mean, he's been very good at cutting costs at other utilities. His other sort of claim to fame, well, two others. One is that when his company that he worked for a long time and Duke Energy merged, he was actually CEO for one day and walked away with $44 million.
I read
which
that.
makes me feel like I am in the wrong business.
How did that work
yet
out
again.
exactly? I read that. That was striking.
I don't know. And then the other one was this weird case before that where in Florida they tried to rebuild the one nuclear power plant in Florida. Progress Energy, which he had run for a long time, said, we're not going to bring in an engineering firm. We're just going to do it ourselves. And they cracked some sort of concrete structure and the entire plant got decommissioned. So that's who PG&E picked. Yeah, so that's kind of one phase. And then the other side of things that I've been really looking at is what's happening in Sacramento, given that PG&E is in bankruptcy, given that wildfire season is approaching. And I will not bore you with all of the sort of policy details that I'm in the weeds on, but I will say this. I think what's interesting to me is that everyone I talk to up there, and I've covered SAC for about 10 years, has never seen this many people from Wall Street walking the halls of the Capitol. The ratings agencies, the investors, their lobbyists are all coming in and have made, I would say, a very concerted and successful effort to scare the living daylights out of the governor and legislature by saying basically that the other big utilities will end up in bankruptcy if you guys don't make some huge regulatory changes in California. And so on Friday, the governor is expected to come out with what I had thought would maybe be like a set of proposals, but his office says will just be a menu of options for lawmakers to consider.
A menu. Very nice.
Actually, they didn't say that exactly, but they didn't dispute it when I characterized it. So anyway.
Well, then they virtually said it.
Gavin's going to come out and say, like, you know, here's the things we need to tackle. Here are some potential ideas. I'm not going to put my weight behind any of them because I don't want to piss anybody off yet, and let the legislature kind of deal with it. But I think it's really interesting, and I will end on this note. PG&E stock has nearly tripled since they filed for bankruptcy, so my free advice to you all is that they will probably end up smelling like roses after this whole thing, and your bills will go up, so maybe buy some stock. Like,
Bob, I mean, PG&E has been a punching bag in this state for years.
well, the city especially, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's what I would say. I came here in 1980, almost 40 years ago, and I have been hearing about how San Francisco is going to take over its own power grid and run this thing. And I would just say, after roughly 20 years of covering City Hall, are you kidding me? You're going to run a power grid? I just find that...
I don't know, man. They could do better than PG&E. Like, it's
Well, you got a low bar.
Yeah,
I have to admit it's a low bar, but I just... Out of thin air, you're going to create a power grid. I found it hard.
well, they're not. They're going to try to buy
use
PG&Es.
the same one and solar. And,
I mean, you could say that the PUC is one of the more effective agencies in this town. but
Really?
You can say
PUC?
not the California, the SFPUC. They make money.
The one,
water.
The one
yeah.
that really wouldn't do anything about PG&E blowing up San Bruno?
Wow.
Well,
come on.
no. And that's the state regulators. I'm talking about the city, the ones who run our water. Yeah, but yeah, no,
water,
no.
yeah.
Go on about the CPUC. I like that.
Actually, yeah, great water, you know. Still boggles my mind that they
yeah.
get it all the way down from the... You know, funny thing about PG&E, probably 20, 30 years ago, I got an E-Trade account, and PG&E went into bankruptcy, and I bought some of its stock, and it's been one of the best stocks I ever bought.
See?
You know?
See?
But recently I looked at it, and it was way down. So when you say it's tripled, I haven't looked in the last couple of days. So I can look at it. No, but what bothers me about a utility like PG&E, which has the monopoly on power, I mean, Alameda has its own power company. right? I don't know how well it actually works, but I really got incensed with PG&E when I got solar. And I found out that they charged me one rate to sell me electricity and like a tenth of a rate to buy it when I have excess power coming out of my solar panels. So I'm not surprised at all that the government wants to do something to kind of save PG&E. But you would think that they should be paying through the nose for what happened, because especially once they've determined that it was their equipment that started the fires. Now, having said that, it's very difficult, you know, for having utility up in the mountains where people are living, you know, in the middle of trees that dry out and grass that dries out during the summertime. So
And who have built in places that if PG&E had their druthers, they would not have connected to.
And now they're defending PG&E.
Yeah. No,
Hard
I
to
can
tell
go both
where-
ways. I
Yeah.
think whiplash here.
Bob's just predicting his stock.
Right.
That's all
Well,
I-
and let me say
that's all
this
I-
about, to Bob's point about like wanting to save them. The thing that has really vexed me the more I dig into this, because it's really easy to be like, yeah, PG&E, man, I pay these guys so much money. They keep burning down people's houses. They blew up San Bruno. I mean, I was there for that too.
yeah.
But then you have to look at like the reality of the way these things are structured. And the thing is, Wall Street will not take a bunch of hits and still back this company, which we rely on them to do. So guess who will end up paying for all of this?
We will.
We will. So there is a balancing act. It's not an easy question for the governor. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the way he handles this and how he sort of goes at the political dynamics within the Capitol, which are, again, going to be really difficult because nobody wants to be seen as giving PG&E a handout.
Very good. Let's talk about an issue that, in fact, touches us just down the street here, and that is housing and affordability and homelessness. In fact, just down the street, there is a
navigation center.
very controversial
Parking lot.
effort, yes, in a parking lot, to build a navigation center. And for those of you listening or watching from out of the area, a navigation center is a little more high-touch homeless shelter that tries to bring in services and deal with people a little bit better than kicking them out in the morning and such like that. Chuck, this is
Chuck, jump in. This is your
like
district,
really-
I
right?
got a little thing to say here. If you'll just stick with me, this to me seems like the perfect San Francisco story. Navigation centers are a good idea, and they're a good idea because they allow people to stay at the center with their belongings, sometimes with their dogs or pets, and with possibly their partner. So those are the major objections to why homeless people do not want to go to the shelter. They get kicked out every morning. They can't bring their belongings. They get ripped off. So navigation centers, good. Okay, this navigation center is going on down here in the Barcadero, and there are some legitimate concerns. It's going to be twice the size of anything they've done before. District 6, where I live, and District 6, where this is, has an inordinate number of shelters and navigation centers. They've borne the brunt of the homeless crisis. However, I would also, and that's why the neighbors are upset. They're afraid it's going to be a mess, and there's going to be, and why do we have to keep doing this? However, I would say there is not going to be a more security-conscious navigation center in San Francisco than this one, because we've already heard from the neighbors, and we know they're going to raise holy heck
Nice job.
about this.
Thank you.
So I don't have a problem with it. But what I think is funny is the neighbors, who are being portrayed as elite, wealthy people, some of whom they are, have raised with a GoFundMe account $94,000. And what they're trying to do is hire this attorney, Andrew Zaks, who's a landlord attorney, to fight the case. But there's another group who said, and this got a lot of attention in the media. Look how much money they've raised. Look at how much, these people are really serious about this. But there's another group who supports the Navigation Center who said, oh yeah, you want to raise money? We can raise money. And Mark Benioff contributed $10,000. And they raised this enormous fund of
It was 163 last week.
I had 43, but 63, yeah. So they raised more money. The only problem is the neighbors have a reason to raise money because they want to pay this attorney. There's no place for that money to go. All they're doing is raising more money to show, we're just waving our wallets and saying, oh yeah, you raised a lot of money, we raised a lot of money. So they said, well, what are you going to do with the money that you raised? And they said, we're going to give it to the Homeless Coalition. which is great for the Homeless Coalition because they've got nothing to do with this navigation center.
Well, I mean, they've been lobbying for
They
it.
didn't build it. They didn't design it. I guess they support it. They're innocent bystanders. They are standing next to the navigation center, and they come over and they hand them $163,000, which I am going to guess doubled their budget.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And if that's not San Francisco in a nutshell, I don't know what is.
Jenny Friedenbach winning for once, right?
I'll note that besides Mark Benioff giving to the Pro Navigation Center group fund, Jack Dorsey from Twitter also has donated to it. And if you remember when Mark Benioff
really?
made a really big stink
Shamed
during
him.
the Prop C,
Yeah.
whatever, right? About raising
last
more
time
money
we
for homeless services in the city. He specifically went after Jack Dorsey and said, "What are you doing? You know, where are you putting your money?"
Jack Dorsey gave money to an account to no one. That's perfect.
So it's probably been 3 or 4 weeks ago, I did a story on this, and I went down to the Embarcadero, and I talked to, what is the place?
Delancey Street?
No, not Delancey, the bar.
Oh, the Red Java.
Java Hut. You know, I talked to a bartender in there, and he made an interesting point. He said, "Look, you know, I walk from BART or from Unity to get over here, and the number of homeless people I see that could use a service like this it's really needed if they will use it." And that's been the issue, as Chuck mentioned, is that a lot of people who are out on the streets, they don't want nothing to do with any kind of structured setting like the navigation center, because as much as they hate being out there, they hate being inside and being told what to do even more. So that's going to be the challenge if they ever get this thing built. It is a parking lot right now. It's at Harrison and the Embarcadero, for those who don't know where it's going to be. Great location, lots of traffic, plenty of opportunities to hold your sign out there when cars are waiting to get on the Bay Bridge. So.
Well, I'll bet if you talk to the people, there's a navigation center in the Mission, I'll bet if you talk to the people around there, they don't find it to be a big problem. I think the navigation center is a far better place for
Than the
those people to be than in a tent on the sidewalk. You know, I just think that there are some restrictions, but not many. If you're in the navigation center, I think they find it to be a worthwhile alternative, and they're willing to do it. It's just that we need to build enough of them that we can really make a difference. Like I said, Matt Haney was the person who mentioned our supervisor in District 6, who's very progressive, said, I am concerned. Navigation centers up until now have been about 100 people. This is going to be over 200. I mean, is that what we're going to do? It could be more difficult, but that's something we need to look at.
Okay. Well, so that's a controversy down the street. There's another housing controversy that has pretty much got people across the state up in arms, including, of course, here in San Francisco, and that is the return of SB 827. Scott Wiener tried to get that bill passed last year. It is now back as SB 50, and this is a bill that would increase density and height limits around within certain distance, I think a half a mile of transit
And job
stops and major jobs,
yeah.
right. Now, he's made a number of changes to it, including trying to deal with displacement fears and types of property that is categorized in certain ways and such. And there are a number of groups that had opposed the previous bill who are now in favor of it. San Francisco's Board of Supervisors famously is not. So,
This is like only Scott Wiener can get like Orange County and San Francisco progressives to agree on something. It's pretty impressive, you know, like you got to give the guy credit. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be really fascinating to watch in the Capitol. So one thing that happened last year, this died in housing and governance. So the pro tem, in her wisdom, I love this. This is like the most politic thing to do. So one of the big opponents is Marin to building, basically, anything. So she split up these committees and gave Scott Wiener one of them and Mike McGuire of the North Bay the other. So the bill has to go through both committees. It already cleared housing because Scott Wiener's the chair. But now he and McGuire have to work together. And I actually think, like, seriously, it's a pretty smart political move by her because you don't want something that, like, nobody in the suburbs can deal with, but you also want, I think, to force folks like that to actually get to the table instead of just killing these types of bills. I also think it's very Scott. I mean, we've watched him for many years, right? So he came out last year like guns blazing, just pissed off everybody. Like the YIMBYs were mad, the NIMBYs were mad. Like everybody was mad about this bill because they felt like he hadn't, talked to the affordable housing advocates. He hadn't talked to the renters coalitions that this was going to push out people. Like the idea being if you build a bunch of of high density stuff around transit, that everybody gets evicted because that's like a developer's dream. And then on the other hand, of course, people in like suburban places were mad because they don't want more people living there, particularly potentially the people who might, not look like them. And so this time he's kind of got the left more on board. Not all the left, because San Francisco's the Twilight Zone. But he's got a lot of the renter and affordable housing advocates, and now he's kind of going up against the suburban NIMBY folks. And I just look forward to watching this, because Scott is one of the few politicians I've ever covered who just doesn't care. Not about like he doesn't care about good policy, he cares deeply about it. He is not concerned about personal attacks on him, about being popular. He wants to get the policy through. And so I just think it's going to be, as a dork, somebody who watches Sacramento, like just an interesting debate to watch.
Well, and what do you think, I can't speak at all. What do you think Governor Gavin Newsom is going to do? Is he going to help or?
Good question.
I think he'll wait for a while and see.
To see
but
where the wind is blowing?
No, more like how Scott handles this. I think his administration has a lot on their plate, and I don't think they've really figured out how to twist arms in the legislature yet. But I think in principle, the governor is very much in support of this idea, and that's one of the reasons that Scott feels like he has a lot of wind at his back, because you have a governor saying we need to build 3.5 million homes or whatever.
And I love Gavin Newsom, but I think his basic thought process is, will this get me on the cover of Time magazine or not?
It could.
This might not. I don't think it will. Every housing expert agrees that what we're going to have to do is build denser housing near transportation centers and work hubs. And I think even the opponents realize that that's the case. And what I think they're saying is, you're right, we need to do this, just
don't do it here.
just don't you tell us how to do it, And they're playing the card that we're going to do it, but we're going to do it in our own time. It's going to take a little longer, but we just need some more study and so forth. And what Scott Wiener is saying, and the reason he didn't talk to the people who were the opponents was they weren't awake at 4 a.m. when he was writing this thing. He's like a machine. This guy's incredible. He just does one thing after another. So I think it's the right idea. I don't know if it's the right time, but it's very difficult to convince people that this is should be done at the state level. I think that's the real problem.
Local control.
I asked him about this at another event. I said, so how are you going to convince people along Mission to increase the density there, which is already pretty dense? How are you going to increase density near Civic Center, BART, or Powell Street, BART? And he said, well, that's something we have to work on. Well, yeah, because these are major transit hubs. The Embarcadero, where are you going to put more dense housing along the Embarcadero, at the Embarcadero station, or Montgomery Street?
Yeah, but I don't think San Francisco's BART line is really the major problem as he sees it. Right.
Yeah. We'd like to see something in the Sunset in the Richmond, for example. And,
yeah.
And those are neighborhoods that do not want to have 5-story apartments or condominiums.
Or Dublin and Pleasanton
We
and
were
Walnut
talking
Creek.
specifically about San Francisco,
San
and
Francisco.
he says we have to do it here. We need it. We have so that'll be some.
I mean, but that gets to the point of how difficult this is. Like even in a dense urban city like this, you still have those concerns. So what happens when you go out to your old stomping grounds?
And some of the opposition within San Francisco has been, okay, so this is like a half mile around these transit stops. Well, in San Francisco, that ends up being almost the whole city, right? Because we've got, the Muni, the BART, we've got...
And we don't have a housing crisis here, so it's fine. Everything's fine.
No, we have an affordable housing crisis here, right?
That's right. No,
Okay,
she's being a smart aleck.
We've got a number of questions here from the audience, and I really have to say, I have terrible handwriting. Sitting at a desk with lighting, you guys are out there in the dark without a desk, writing on your knees, and some of you have the best handwriting. Seriously, it looks painstakingly written. I love this.
Well, you know, they used,
But
to, teach
what's the
they used to
content?
teach cursive in school back,
Right.
back in the day. Right?
But what's the content, John? That's the question. Is that appropriate?
Well, some of it doesn't like what you guys have been saying about immigration.
Okay.
I'll just take part of one because we're running out of time. President Obama was in Berlin recently, and he said that not all people who are for enforcing immigration laws are racist. How do you reconcile that with what we've been talking about tonight?
I mean, I think that's totally true. I mean, I think the question is the policies that the president has been pushing, which are outside of the law, not whether the people who are enforcing them, right? I mean, you see that in every sort of society, right? It's the policymakers and the people writing the laws that you raise questions about, not the people necessarily carrying out that.
Yeah, and Andrew Sullivan has pointed out that Emmanuel Macron, France, I'm forgetting her name, Ardern in New Zealand,
Oh,
the
yeah.
Prime Minister. I mean, both of them have been pretty tough on immigration,
Yeah.
as was Barack Obama.
Yes.
Well, he was getting rid of people that had criminal convictions, you know, violent criminals, which I totally agree with.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, the fact that so many people are coming in is a problem. The fact that these people are doing jobs that Americans won't do is not the problem. The problem is when you have people, and I'm going to go on, I'm going to go do a Bob here. The sanctuary laws that say that I can't call immigration if I have somebody who I know is here illegally and has just committed a violent felony.
Well, that's not actually true.
Well, it's not true, but I'm speaking in terms of the guy in San Jose that followed a woman into her house, broke into her house, killed her, and then he got caught because he basically got caught on home surveillance cameras, and they identified him. They knew who the guy was. They actually had stopped him on Sunday and about possession of marijuana and let him go, and he killed the woman. I think it was on Monday. I can't remember the name, but he had been deported, I think, something like 6 times, 3, 4, 5, 6 times.
But never for anything violent, right? Because that's what the sanctuary laws say. And I think that if he was an upstanding citizen who had gotten caught for marijuana, you would say absolutely don't deport him.
Right.
So it's sort of what was that Tom Cruise movie where we know what crimes they're going to commit before they do it?
I was going with Risky Business, but I think you mean Minority Report.
Minority Report. Again, way more fun. I mean, I think it's like hindsight's always 20/20,
Right.
and we can say, well, that guy was a terrible person, but if they had not been caught for something like that, I mean, it certainly feeds into the narrative of I think people who are anti-immigrant and who feel that what Trump's doing is the right thing to do. But I mean, I think it's like to the audience members' comment. I mean, we were talking about the leadership of these agencies, which again, I would always differentiate from the rank and file of any law enforcement agency. Those are not necessarily the same things. And if you're the Customs and Border Patrol guy checking my passport, you're very different than Kirstjen Nielsen going before Congress and defending family separations.
Thanks to our panel today, Bob Butler, Marisa Lagos, Chuck Nevius. Thanks to all of you here in person and listening online or watching. Have a great week.
Thank you.